Hey guys, Otakushinsaku back again, and today we're reacting to another Poseidon Entertainment video. If you guys know, I've reacted to another video of his in the past, but this one is on him asking the question, why do Disney adults exist? Why do Disney adults exist? And I'm curious to see what his thoughts are on it, and of course, what my thoughts are going to be on it as we go through this journey together, going through his video essay. But my whole thing for the literal title question is because this is how Disney wanted things to be. Disney literally created and curated since the late 80s with the boom of VHS that this is what they wanted, because there's no way in hell Disney did not know that the kids who grew up watching Disney movies at home on VHS would not grow up to become Disney adults. And I'm babbling and la 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 la, but that's why you come to me, because again, I don't hide the fact that I'm autistic and ADHD and all that good stuff. So you're gonna get the weirdness of the autism and the ADHD. Strap in. When you subscribe to Otakushinsaku, which you definitely should do, by the way, you definitely should subscribe to Otakushinsaku. When you subscribe to me, you know what you're getting. You're getting the ADHD and the autism, and you're getting it full force. Anyway. Let's get into this.
Alright, so if you didn't catch it, I wrote and produced a video relatively recently that took a look at the divide between theme park fans and Disney adults. A big part of that video for me was distinguishing what makes someone a theme park fan and dissecting exactly what it is about themed experiences that are just so fascinating. It's that desire for world building and wanting to know how the illusion works that I think plays a large part in theme park fandom, and I thought it was important to distinguish these kinds of people, which I consider myself to be one of, from Disney adults. A Disney adult is a difficult thing to really define, because if you're someone who's going to the parks without children, and you're maybe buying the mini ears and wearing a t-shirt that sports a recognizable Disney intellectual property while you're having fun, does that actually make you a Disney adult? No, because that's perfectly normal human behavior, even if there is a large segment of society that will make fun of people for doing so. I spent quite a lot of time in the Disney Adults video trying to define what they actually are, and I ended up getting random comments from outsiders saying that I was producing up straw men. But if you're anywhere near the Disney fandom online, you'll definitely know that I'm talking about a very specific kind of person, even if they're not the easiest to define. A Disney adult is often portrayed as a millennial or Gen Z aged person who makes talking about Disney their entire personality. It's constant bragging about going to the Disney parks to others, and identifying with the Disney branding at an incredibly superficial level. As in, complaining that Tiana isn't in her specific dress from the movie in Tiana's Bayou Adventure, or saying that Tokyo Disney Sea isn't Disney enough because you're not constantly bombarded with animated characters. It's the kind of person who will spend all their time giving bad vacation advice online, excitedly describing how cafeteria food from around the resort is amazing, and who will tell everyone about how cute it was that they saw Moana wallpaper at the Polynesian, or the Incredibles slapped up on the wall at the Contemporary. There really are many people out there who will gush over what Bob Chapek called capital D Disney.
Yeah, and again, as I said in that previous video, and it's what makes me separate from like an actual Disney adult, is that stuff I would like make note of. Like if I go to Disney or if I go to Disneyland or Disney World with like some friends or something like that, that would be stuff that I would like make note of and make jokes of in the moment. But it's not something that I would like take with me as like a memory, because I'm going to Disneyland, I'm in Disney World. Of course, there's gonna be Disney stuff there. It's like literally going to like Radio Shack and being like, oh my god, they have electronics. It's like, yeah, no, duh. Or, well, I guess Radio Shack is like way before some Gen Zers. There's gonna be some Gen Zers in the comments who are gonna be like, what's Radio Shack? I don't know. Go on Google Images and find out. But no, yeah, no, I'm not a Disney adult in that way, because I would not be like obsessive about it. I'd just be like, yeah, there's Disney stuff here. Neato. Why would I expect there not to be Disney stuff here in the Disney theme park?
As in, this pure reverence and worship of Disney iconography at a superficial level by people who have absolutely no consumer standards. And as I argued in the other Disney Adults video, this is actively harming the Disney parks experience. It's clear that actual Disney leadership isn't trying any longer, turning their parks into messes of random attractions that essentially work as billboards of Disney iconography, while destroying the thematic cohesion that once made Disney parks the best in the industry. Disney used to have cultural depth in its parks and even its resorts, and a lot of that is getting erased by doing the bare minimum and slapping characters onto concrete buildings. There are even attractions out there that are akin to Six Flags quality, and that's not hyperbole. It's incredibly troublesome because Disney is destroying itself as a creative and cultural institution because they know that quality and effort no longer matter, as there are many people out there who will continue going into thousands of dollars worth of credit card debt just to stage photos in front of the castle or brag to their coworkers about how they're taking another quarterly Disney vacation with their family. I covered pretty extensively why this is bad for the parks, and why, as a theme park fan, it's frustrating to see Disney destroy itself by corporate executives who fail to understand their product and the creative legacy of the company. The question is, though, who exactly are the Disney adults? Because I know that they exist, but I don't think that I was able to really identify who they were in that initial video. However, people in the comments put forward a lot of really interesting explanations about who these people are and where they come from, and so that's what I wanted to explore today. I already told you why Disney adults have destroyed the Disney brand and legacy through their blind endorsement of poor decisions constantly made by the corporate executives, but with this video, I wanted to explore theories of why they exist. So leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get into theories on what turns someone into a Disney adult. In the previous video, I received a bit of flack for describing Disney adults as ignorant suburbanites who live in a sheltered, closed-off world. Yeah, I suppose it is mean-spirited, but there is definitely a class of people who might be formally educated and who might look successful on the surface, but if you could look into their heads and hear their thoughts, you would hear nothing but a dull buzzing sound. They're the cogs in the machine that live life without volition, simply just going from one phase of life and through the next because of what they think they're supposed to do, rather than having any real aspiration or knowing how to engage with the world in any kind of critical way. Yeah, it's a bit ironic because I live in the suburbs too, and I'm even fascinated by casual consumerism, which I think is actually pretty great despite the miserable people who lament its existence. But when I personally engage with anything, whether it's pop culture or not, I want to actively think about the experience and dissect what I did and did not like about it. There are so many people who go through life and think no thoughts, simply reacting to things in accordance with the biases that have been instilled in them. In this case, Disney adults just go to Disney because they expect Disney IP, because they cannot possibly conceive of Disney being anything other than the sum of its iconography. Attractions with great theming will go over their heads because it was never about environment or atmosphere or storytelling.
Again, that's another reason why I'm not a Disney adult. Is because, again, if I went to Disneyland or Disney World and I went on some attractions and went to some themed areas that are exclusive to the parks and not in any like major movie or anything like that, I would be fine. In fact, I would incredibly like it. Because I would, like he says, I would enjoy the art of it because of the fact that I do appreciate art and the hard work that the artists and Imagineers and stuff like that put into their work and craft. And so if I went into a Disney park and I went into a themed area that wasn't a movie, I'm fine with it. I'm not one of these Disney adults who'd be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I wasted my time going to a themed area or an attraction or whatever that isn't like a major motion picture or a major IP. Like, again, one of my favorite rides of all time at Disney is the Haunted Mansion, and that has nothing to do with the movies, because every single Haunted Mansion movie, that every single adaptation of the Haunted Mansion into a movie has been a complete abject failure. And the reason why that is because the Haunted Mansion works as a ride. As a ride and as an experience, it's fantastic. And that's why I love it, is because of the fact that in order to get the most out of the Haunted Mansion, you actually have to ride the ride. You can't just, expect there to be a movie adaptation of the ride and have it be good. Um, because the Haunted Mansion is different than Pirates of the Caribbean. Pirates of the Caribbean is a great ride, but it's also an even greater movie due to the fact that the ride was just an experience. It was just it was just pirates fantasy. Whereas, and so the movies took that and did their own thing with it. Whereas the Haunted Mansion tries to replicate the storyline of, like, they try in their own ways to replicate the storyline, if you want to call it that, of the Haunted Mansion, and it fails because of that. Whereas with like a successful Haunted Mansion movie, you need to basically just do like generic. There's literally a haunted mansion with ghosts in it, but use that to do like a jumping off point and do your own great story on top of it. Because of the fact that you really just can't replicate the ride on screen. And so, yeah, no, I love when Disney gets experimental like that. I love when Disney gets experimental and does things just for the sake of it being a fun idea for a themed area or an attraction. And not, oh, how can we take this pre-existing IP and force it into an attraction?
It was always about pointing to a character that they were familiar with and shouting, "Hey look, that's a thing I know." Just like the many decades of people who failed to understand that Disneyland's original Fantasyland rides lacked Snow White, Mr. Toad, Peter Pan, or Alice, and were upset because they couldn't deduce that riders took on the role of those characters and experienced events through their eyes, even though it was fairly obvious that was the case. They needed to be spoon-fed information because they couldn't understand why they couldn't visually see those characters on the rides. And while I don't really have an issue with how those characters were later added in, because these attractions still retained a lot of charm, it does speak to how superficially shallow the general person can be. On the topic of shallowness, I think it's time to introduce the first theory of what makes for a Disney adult. A lot of people in the comments of the original video postulated that for many people, being a Disney adult is about status, or comparing themselves to others to make themselves feel important. Before I moved to Orlando, I worked a corporate job, and there was a woman there who could not stop talking about how she was constantly going to Disney with her family. It was always cute character this, oh we're spending so much money to stay in this resort that, and one of my managers, who knew that I had a pass to pretty much every park in Florida, asked me what was up with the Disney obsession to the point where it consumed her entire personality. I simply responded that, yeah, I don't know, she's weird. Like, there's a lot more to the parks than just characters and kid stuff, which is all she seemed to talk about. However, since people are bringing up the suggestion that Disney can be about status, I have to wonder if this woman's obsession with talking about it was a form of validation, of letting people know that she and her husband had money and could constantly afford to drive 2 hours but spend thousands of dollars on Disney resorts throughout the year. The more I think about it, it does make sense that it's a flex of status, but in a way that doesn't feel too pretentious or alienating. If, for example, you were from an upper middle class family and were constantly telling people about how you were traveling to expensive cities and staying at expensive hotels and eating at Michelin star restaurants, people would probably look at you like a snob that was trying to show off. Disney, or at least Walt Disney World, is a sort of cultural obligation for the East Coast of the United States though. It's a place where parents strive to take young children at least once as part of a general pressure to relive their own childhood experiences there through the eyes of their own children. I think that has its own issues, as it doesn't come from an actual love or interest in themed environments, but the point I'm making is that while Disney can be very expensive and is priced like a luxury vacation, there's something about its pop culture status and cultural accessibility in the Eastern US that makes it not feel pretentious. I think that for many people, especially members of Disney's timeshare program known as Disney Vacation Club, I think it's plausible that talking about their constant vacations is intended as a subtle brag meant to flex wealth and status, at least for upper middle class suburbanites. Maybe they're not true Disney adults in the sense that they don't obsess over the capital D Disney branding, but they often feel like casuals who have no interest in the actual themed environments and rides. And so the associated Disney iconography is a large part of what reinforces that flex. I don't think that this is necessarily a large demographic of people though. On the other side of this, you have the so-called Disney influencers who are all about flexing status, which is often accomplished through their wardrobe. It's the constant use of Disney shirts and dozens of mini ears, and maybe even Club 33 merchandise that they flaunt, despite not being actual members, that really conveys the message that they think they're better than everyone else, even if they attempt to appear humble and thank everyone for watching them. I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with wearing Disney merchandise, but when it's flaunted in a certain way from the influencer crowd with a sense of entitlement behind it, that superficiality of engaging with the Disney brand is very clearly a vessel to brag to others that they're better than the average person. The superficiality isn't surprising though, as a lot of Disney influencer content is just inherently shallow because there's no passion for the product. You'll see people who will disingenuously hype up new food items even though you know the quality is probably awful, or if they do attempt to describe the food, they don't have the knowledge or vocabulary to actually convey what they're tasting, and will just make generic remarks, because it was never about anything other than the grift. I want to emphasize, there are certainly great content creators out there who review the Disney parks and have meaningful commentary to add to the conversation, but for many others, their status through creating Disney content is defined by that inherent superficiality of the Disney adult, because it was always about seeking attention and money, and not love for the parks themselves.
Yeah, and that's why when you go to these theme parks, you should do it because you actually want to be there and not for any superficial reason. I completely agree with that point, and I think it's a very strong point that needs to be emphasized, that if you go to these theme parks, it should be because you genuinely want to be there. God, I can't speak. That you genuinely want to be there, and not out of any sort out of any sort of superficial reasons.
Another theory put forward for why Disney adults exist is that as society becomes more secular and religion fades, the general public has begun replacing traditional facets of religion with pop culture fandom. This idea
This is how the 80s and 90s supplanted and made sure that capitalism became basically the new state religion. The current new big state religion is consumerism through capitalism. Is the new big state religion that we are living in, and especially here in America, that we are living in an era where the biggest single religion in terms of raw power is the abject worship of capitalism through mindless consumerism.
of replacing religious iconography with pop culture reminds me of that prank from a while back, where people would print out a photo of Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan from Attack of the Clones, and would present him in a frame to their grandmother as a photo of Jesus. The prank would continue as the person giving the gift would correct their grandmother by pointing out that it's Obi-Wan Kenobi, but the women would become defensive and insist that the photo was of Jesus. Maybe these pranks were staged, but I do think that this sort of fanatical, unbreaking devotion to religion and the iconography that comes with it is very much a real phenomenon, even if I can't even begin to understand it myself. A lot of people in my comments on the original Disney Adults video put this idea forward that pop culture is replacing religious iconography, but there's one comment in particular from JGJ75 that I thought was worth sharing. They said, "Your repeated use of the word iconography is interesting. I've read studies where psychologists have theorized that as millennials and younger generations largely abandoned the religious traditions of their ancestors, many of them have tended to replace those religions with fandoms. Thus, someone seeing a topiary of Goofy in Epcot might be having a feeling akin to their grandmother seeing a painting or statue of their favorite saint in a church. It's weird, I know, but the theory fits the behavior you observed. It would also explain why someone expecting to have a similar type of quasi-religious experience based on seeing their favorite icons would be disappointed by the relative lack of such iconography in Disney Sea. It also explains why these fans defend their fandoms so fiercely. I think the premise.
And before he goes on, I just want to say I completely agree with that comment. I just wanted it to play out in full before I gave my reaction to it, because I completely agree with that comment that we are living in a world where fandoms have replaced religions, and I've seen that for myself. Because as an atheist, I have basically like my replacement for that hole in my soul, so to speak, if I were to take some religious verbiage, is replace it with scientism and fandoms and nerd fandoms, right? So nerd culture, nerd fandoms, and scientism have replaced religion for me. You know, I like that part of my brain, that part of me that lights up whenever you have a religious experience, lights up whenever I'm, watching an episode of Mythbusters or some long form science documentary on the Science Channel, or a science video, I guess, on YouTube. And of course, dealing with fandoms that I'm a part of, namely, as you guys all know, the big one for me is the Fate franchise, Fate Stay Night, Type Moon, all that good stuff. So whenever I see like a statue of Archer, or whenever I walk into a weapons like a thing at the mall where they sell replica weapons, and I see that they have a replica of Excalibur specifically from Fate, or they have a replica of Kukulkaan's lance from Fate, that I have that sort of religious experience. I'm like, oh my god, it's basically like the same thing as like coming across like some sort of religious artifact if you're religious. Yeah, I can see where they're going with that argument, because it does play out for me specifically. I can't describe it any better than that. That like, yeah, that I'm religious for fandoms. And also the problem with that is that you get into this whole thing where fandoms have gone through in like the 2010s and the 2020s of there being obsessively toxic fans in these fandoms, and comparing it to religion, I can now see why. Because these people are basically they're using their fandoms to gain power. Like you go on YouTube, you go on TikTok, you go on Twitter, and you deal with these fans who basically want to be like the popes and the bishops of the fandom space that they're a part of, and dictate to everyone beneath them, or who they perceive beneath them, as the rules of the, I guess, religion. uh it's just so gross. But yeah, no, I just wanted to give my 2 cents on that and say that I agree.
The premise of your comment makes a lot of sense, and there's a pretty prominent example of this through just how fanatically uncritical the D23 crowd is. When I watch Disney announce more stupid and poorly thought out projects that will replace attractions that I think are well done and important to the thematic identities of their parks, there's just always this massive crowd whooping and cheering for every single announcement, even though Disney has burned us creatively again and again and again. Why are Avatar and Coco going into a park that was at one point themed to celebrating the state of California? There's so much potential for interesting attractions and theming there, but while the park got off to a bad start, it was made worse when Disney started vomiting Pixar characters everywhere, and then introduced a bunch of concrete buildings and called it Avengers Campus. Which has what to do with the park exactly? I mean, I guess Disney already run the theme of California Adventure, especially when you consider that Cars Land, no matter how fantastically well done it is, also takes place in Arizona. So sure, throw in more random properties to the park since you already ruined it and sucked the creativity out of the product, but why are people cheering for it? Well, as I established, the superficiality of the Disney adult is fed by projects just like these, and to compare this uncritical fanatical devotion to Disney iconography in a way that's similar to religion, well, I guess that might be a valid avenue for partially explaining why people are also the way they are. In the other Disney Adults video, I shared a story about how a person I knew got weirdly defensive when I joked that the 2023 Haunted Mansion movie was bad, treating my joke as if it was a personal attack against them. Well, another example I have is when I was talking about Galaxy's Edge to a group of people, and I said something to the effect that the land itself just feels barren and dead, and that Rise of the Resistance is a good ride, but isn't spectacular in the way that people have hyped it up to be. Again, this same person retorted with, well, you just have to be a Star Wars fan to appreciate the ride. First, as a Star Wars fan myself, I can also be critical of the franchise, especially the sloppy Disney sequel films that were nothing more than...
Yeah, no. This is what gets me about fans and fandoms, is that if you cannot be critical with what you're a part of, then you're not really, like, in my opinion, a good fan. A good fan is someone who is able to do creative criticism, someone who is able to objectively and even subjectively and know the difference, someone who knows the difference between subjective and objective critique, and give that to their favorite franchises and their favorite fandoms, right? Being someone who just uncritically just regurgitates and ingests everything that because it has the name Star Wars on it, I have to like it. No, just because it has the name Star Wars on it doesn't mean you have to like it. Especially if you're a Star Wars fan and you want the franchise to still be top notch and still be a AAA, quadruple A franchise, you need to call out when they flounder. You need to call out Disney when they biff and do something terrible with the franchise. So I completely agree with him that if you go to Star Wars land, you should be able to look at it objectively and go, or even subjectively, and just go, I don't like this, or I do like this, or do objective critical critique of just like, oh, that doesn't work for X and Y and Z reasons. Like, I just can't stand these people who, and also they act like it's a personal attack. It's like, okay, so if I say something bad about Star Wars, how is that saying something bad about you? Right? If someone says that they didn't like the newest Star Wars movie, I don't perceive that as a personal attack because I didn't create the movie. I don't own the franchise. I'm not the Disney CEO, so it has literally nothing to do with me. As well as the fact that you'll go back to full screen. As well as it helps due to the fact that I was born and raised jaded with the Star Wars franchise, because since I was born in the 90s, I grew up with the Star Wars prequels. And so I was literally born and raised with people telling me that my favorite movies of Star Wars were like literally the worst things that humanity has ever created. So yeah, like, I grew up on YouTube in the early 2000s when every popular YouTube video essay in like 2007 was telling you about how bad episode 2 was and how bad you are for even thinking that you like it. How dumb can you be for saying you like this movie that is objectively horrible and it's the worst movie ever made, period, by mankind, period.
Superficial nostalgia bait, rather than actual stories with any degree of interesting substance or world building. Second, if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that I always say that interesting attraction design always beats the quality of an intellectual property. As an example, I certainly don't love the Jurassic World films, but Universal has created absolutely fantastic Jurassic World attractions that shine regardless of the source material. The reason I bring up the Galaxy's Edge example should be fairly obvious though. The difference between how myself and this other person engage with the Star Wars fandom is completely different. I grew up with Star Wars and have liked a lot of its expanded universe, especially the Knights of the Old Republic games, but I'm not averse to being critical, especially when Disney came in and tried to reboot the franchise with films that felt less like real stories and were instead trying to cash in on original trilogy nostalgia by catering to a toxic fanatical fanbase that refused to acknowledge the strengths of George Lucas's prequel films, flawed as they were. The prequel haters certainly exemplified a fanaticism akin to religious fervor, but the person who also took my criticism of Galaxy's Edge as a personal attack by attempting to gatekeep Star Wars reinforces that notion as well. So my question is, why does this level of extremism exist? Does it have to do with brain chemistry? Maybe, but I think that community and identity is a large part of it as well. Religion has certainly played an undeniable role in historically creating communities for better or worse, and as it fades, as Western society continues to become more secular, perhaps fandoms have replaced that sense of community, especially with the rise of the internet that allows people to easily meet others with mutual interests, along with greater broad social acceptance of pop culture that was once considered to be something nerdy or exclusively for children. By criticizing an aspect that the fandom latches onto, it seemed to have resulted in a hostile and defensive, almost tribalistic reaction that speaks to a less intellectual engagement with the Star Wars brand. In the same way that some people become tribalistic in the sports teams that they support, reacting aggressively if you dismiss their team, I can see how that level of uncritical devotion can manifest in pop culture fandoms as well, even if it's something that I just can't understand. It's one thing to be a passionate fan for a sports team or a fandom, but when it consumes your entire personality as a tribalistic attachment that becomes core to your identity, that very much does seem reminiscent of religious zealotry if you can't accept that the organization you subscribe to can be flawed. I've certainly experienced a lot of backlash from all the Disney criticism I put out over the years, with people accusing me of everything from hating Disney because I'm a so-called universal shill, to people telling me that Disney is for children and that nothing I have to say matters.
Yeah. That kind of argument is also one that makes me mad. It's like, oh, you're a universal shill. It's like, these companies don't care for you. And unless you're directly employed by them and getting a direct paycheck from them, they legitimately do not care about you other than how much money you give them in terms of, so like, I just can't understand that, like, oh, you're a universal shill. It's like, okay, so what if I am? But going beyond the fact, like, for me, I just like to go to theme parks. Like, I'm not one of these people who would get. This is another reason why I'm not a Disney adult, because I'm not one of these people who would be upset about getting a ticket to like Universal Studios. Like, if someone came to me and say, "Hey, I've got this ticket to Universal Studios. You want to go with me?" Like, if someone offered to take me to Universal Studios or fucking SeaWorld or whatever, I don't give a shit. I'll go. Like, why would I not? Like, I just don't understand these people who are so greedy. They're like, no, no, no. If it's not Disney, then I don't want to go. It's like, okay, what the fuck? Because Universal Studios has great rides too. Like, these are theme parks. That's kind of their whole job is to provide rides and entertainment. So yeah, no, I just don't get that. Oh, you're Universal shill. Okay, I'm not. But even if I was, who gives a fuck?
Matters because it's not for adults anyways. As an argument, that just seems like Disney adults deflecting and hiding behind the supposed preferences of children, because Disney is clearly not just for kids. It never has been. So yeah, to say that devotion to pop culture as a replacement for religion in society does seem to hold true from my observation. And when you see Disney adults who are obsessed with the branding of the company but fail to recognize its artistry and take criticism of the company as a personal attack, as I often see in my comments, I think that it really does reinforce the idea of how modern fandom has replaced religion for many people, which partially explains the phenomenon of the Disney adult. Staying on the topic of religion, another postulation put forward by many people is that Mormons make up a huge part of what we perceive to be Disney adults. Admittedly, I don't have a lot of knowledge about Mormonism other
Okay, I'm gonna need him to explain this. I'm gonna need him to explain this because what? How do Mormons have anything to do with I need to look this up. How do Mormons have anything to do with Disney adults? Let's look at this. So apparently, the connection between Mormons, members of the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints, and Disney adults is a recognized cultural phenomenon, while the former having a notably higher likelihood of falling into the latter category compared to the general population. So overlap is driven by shared cultural values and a mutual appreciation for wholesome, family-oriented entertainment and themes of hope and optimism. Okay, historical relationship. There is a documented historical relationship, including a Mormon employee, Floyd. I'm not even gonna try to say that name, but you can read it right there. Who was instrumental in the design of Mickey Mouse and specific Mormon nights at Disneyland in the past. Google Trends data shows that Utah, with its high church population, has an exceptionally high search volume for Disney and Disneyland, even surpassing California. Proximity to parks and cultural inclination make engagement easier. A significant number of Mormon influencers produce Disney-themed content, further reinforcing and normalizing this overlap with their community. Oh, okay. So it's basically because it's about the wholesome family entertainment and hope and optimism. Okay. I didn't even really think about that. Yeah, and if you guys want to read, there's more of this. Pause the video if you want to read that, I guess. But yeah. So that's something I didn't know until you just brought it up right just now. So I guess there's a whole connection between the Mormons and Disney adults. Okay. Did not know that. That's coolio.
Other than that, it's a relatively young religion that builds on Christianity with additional books. And I'm vaguely aware of its origins with Joseph Smith and how Mormons are highly concentrated in Utah and in pockets of the surrounding states. I also know that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the LDS Church, controls a lot of Mormon communities, hoards wealth, and has a strong hand in the development of predatory multi-level marketing schemes that continue to funnel more money to the church. This video isn't some scathing criticism about the cult of Mormonism, but I think it's important to establish that the LDS Church exerts a very firm hand of control over its members, and a large part of that is tied in culturally with Disney. I was recently pointed to a video by Alyssa Grenfell, an ex-Mormon who produces content that talks about her past experiences within Mormonism, and in her video on Disney adults, she draws a lot of very strong connections with Mormonism and Disney. For example, she explains how traditional Disney animated princess films reinforce conservative gender roles, where women are valued almost exclusively for their beauty. They live incomplete, often unhappy lives until a strong man steps in to marry her for that fairy tale happily ever after. She draws parallels with women in the Mormon Church who are expected to fall into that subservient role, and those more traditional Disney animated films are often approved by the church because they help reinforce that level of control. Grenfell also expressed how when she attended Brigham Young University, which was founded by Mormons and named after the second president of the LDS Church, the Disney mania was incredibly widespread among the community on campus. She makes points throughout the video about how the church forbids Mormons to engage with profane or inappropriate content, and how R-rated movies are off the table. When the church dictates
So I guess that's a lesson for y'all, that if you want to avoid Mormons, then you go to Universal Studios, especially during Halloween Horror Nights and stuff like that. Apparently, that's where you go, and you will not see a ounce or a wink of them, because that content is purely forbidden. I could not imagine living such a life, because I love horror movies. One of my favorite franchises is Saw. I love horror movies. I love Five Nights at Freddy's and and Jigsaw and fucking I guess like what's on the literally what's on the screen and all of that like all of that classic horror movies, Dracula, the Wolfman, all that good stuff. I'm a huge horror nut, so I couldn't imagine living a lifestyle that forbid that. Oh god, what a boring lifestyle that must be. Because it's so fun to just go to a nice haunted house and just be scared for a little bit.
what media people can and cannot consume, it makes a lot of sense that the family-friendly nature and conservative ideas of older Disney films would resonate with leadership. it would become an immensely powerful cultural force that can be twisted to reinforce the message of the LDS Church.
The message.
Another point that Grenfell makes is that within Mormon culture, there is often a very aggressive toxic positivity, a social policing that not just generally discourages negative feelings, but I think also preaches that happiness comes from faith and salvation. This toxic positivity is more about keeping up the appearance of happiness, rather than, well, actually achieving it. And if you look at the Disney branding more broadly among its more popular iconography, it makes sense that Disney would culturally dominate Mormon communities as church-approved media, and why all the students at BYU would be constantly referencing Disney content. Grenfell goes further though. It speaks about how wealth in Mormon communities is often associated with devotion to the church. Other than the church itself being a money funneling scheme, upper-class Mormons who can afford frequent vacations to Disneyland and Walt Disney World often do so as a flex of status. Not only does their wealth indicate their virtue through their hard work, but it also means that they are successful enough to be sources of large pools of cash for generous tithing. Along with Disney content being mostly church-approved media as well, vacations to Disney also reinforce dedication to the church, whether through the perception that Disney embodies traditional conservative societal roles, or through how its brand of manufactured happiness resonates with that looming pressure to be in a constant state of grateful, joyful expression. Again, going back to the previous Disney Adults video, I made comments about how there is a class of sheltered suburbanite that seems willfully ignorant of the world around them. People who embrace a strange, unwarranted level of positivity that feels regressive and childish. And as I'm writing this, it clicked. They're Mormons, and it makes so much sense because they didn't understand where these people were coming from. Grenfell even makes the claim that within Mormon culture, childhood is seen as pure, and when Mormon adults show more childlike behavior, it's often seen as a retaining of that purity, and therefore evidence of stronger dedication to the teachings of the church. If you watch my videos frequently, you know that I have knowledge within the themed industry, and that I know people across it. But I was speaking to someone not too long ago who works event operations for Disney. He was telling me about a park buyout he worked that was essentially a singles meet and greet for Mormons, and I was like, what? Are there even enough Mormons in Orlando for them to do that? I quickly realized that yes, they do actually have a significant community in the area. Back behind Universal, there is a Mormon church with a pretty conspicuous spire that you can see from around the area. And so, while I thought of Mormons as mostly being concentrated in Utah, it makes sense that I've been seeing them at Walt Disney World all this time, and I now have an explanation for their often bewildering behavior. If you've ever seen those videos of people crying when they meet Disney characters, or who have strange, contrived body language that expresses joy in a way that feels dramatic that calls attention to themselves, like for example, dramatically clasping their hands together in delight, it wouldn't surprise me to find out that it's Mormons being performative to show their dedication to the Disney brand. It makes sense why Mormons would become Disney adults, because it's all about using Disney's wholesome image to reinforce Mormon culture, and thus control. Disney's image is more important than the actual content within the parks, which helps explain why some people gush over every new IP attraction announced, because it was never about the park experience so much as reinforcing the bright and colorful capital D Disney branding. Disney for upper-class Mormons is about status, wealth, and purity, and explains so much about the bizarre Disney adult phenomenon. To conclude this video, I want to say that there are many reasons for why Disney adults exist, and hopefully, my exploration of these reasons put forward by people commenting on the other video was interesting. For many people, going to Disney often or taking their family there is about status, and validating their lives by comparing their own to others, whether it's the person bragging about being a DBC member, or an influencer who's all about the grift.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there is a large part of the human population that is dedicated to religious iconography and the tribalism of belonging to an in-group that has become a core part of their identity. I think there's validity to the claim that as society has become more secular, it would make sense for that type of person to latch onto pop culture fandom, which would explain the superficiality of people who constantly drink up the Disney brand. Finally, I think there's a very strong case for Mormonism combining both of these aspects of status and brand dedication, reinforcing their role within the Mormon community. This video is certainly no scientific evaluation of the psychology behind what makes for Disney adults, but I thought that people's explanations of them were worth exploring, and I learned a lot of interesting information in trying to discover why this kind of person exists. As a theme park fan, I just want Disney to go back to actual creative storytelling and put effort into regaining their title as the gold standard in themed entertainment. But its corporate culture exists within the world of shareholders and private equity firms preying on businesses throughout the US and around the world. A lot of the short-term profit decisions made by the company today, knowing that slapping a character onto a ride is more than adequate for the shallowness of the Disney adult, is something that I've continued to express will hurt the company long term. When you continue cutting quality and interesting theming in favor of turning the theme parks into Disney Plus IP brand synergy advertisements, how long can that really last? I'm sure that there's a lot of people who will always support the company regardless of what decisions it makes, and even despite my discussion exploring theories of what makes for Disney adults, I think that there are still probably other explanations out there that haven't been explored yet. If you have any of your own ideas or theories as to why Disney adults exist, or if you want to elaborate on the reasons that I've already discussed, I would be very interested to hear your reasoning. If you made it here to the end of the video though, and have found it interesting, I would very much appreciate it if you left a like to help boost.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I completely second that. As this is basically showing that the video's over, and I just kicked the desk because I do that. But yes, if you have any thoughts or opinions or anything like that discussed in this video, please comment below. Let me know. Give me a like if you like this video, and especially to help me to further along my YouTube career, please subscribe. I cannot thank you enough. If you have subscribed, I thank you, and please, if you wouldn't mind, subscribe. But I am Otakushinsaku, and that is what we have for today. So I will see you guys next time.